I think it has made the process of learning so much faster, more efficient. I feel like my own abilities have expanded immeasurably.
Hi, I'm Helen Tepper, the host of HSBC's Power Up podcast, a podcast that's all about helping people to perform at their best. And I'm very excited today that I'm going to be talking to Hannah Fry, mathematician, broadcaster and author. Together, we are going to be talking about the connection between humans and artificial intelligence and how we can use AI to help us perform at our best. Hannah, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me.
I'm very excited about this conversation and talking about lots of different aspects of AI, but I would like to start with you because we ask all of our guests, what is powering them up at the moment?
You know what? I know that we're going to talk about AI and technology, but actually the thing that's powering me up at the moment is stepping away from my technology.
Okay.
I've got into this very good habit recently. I've had a little digital detox. I put my phone away for 3 entire weeks, didn't have a phone at all.
I don't know how.
It was, do you know what? I didn't even miss it. It was great. I really enjoyed it.
So your world now, AI is in it, but it hasn't always been in it. You're a mathematician. So where did the AI interest come in?
I would say that kind of all AI are mathematical models to some degree or another, right? Fundamentally, they are mathematical structures. And so I've been, working on mathematical modelling for basically my entire career. There was one really key moment, though, that switched me particularly onto this idea of humans and AI and that interface between them and how they butt up against one another. And it was just after I'd finished my PhD. This was in 2010. And I was at university in London. The police in London had this terrible summer where there had been this outbreaking of really serious rioting across the country. And things had gotten very out of hand very quickly. So there was 5 entire days of loads of looting, loads of arson. So after all of that happened, the police, I think, wanted to get a handle on what had happened from a data-driven perspective and whether they could have done anything different about it. So they gathered a team of academics, of mathematicians and criminologists and some town planners and things. And they gave us the data of everybody who'd been involved and arrested in connection with these riots. We did the analysis, we published this paper, and as part of it, we constructed this sort of proof of concept mathematical model, this algorithm really, which looks at the question of if something like this were to happen again, is there a tool that we could create to support the police in bringing about a swifter resolution to the unrest. Anyway, so we published this paper and it was very well received by the academic community. And then a few years later in 2014, I was giving a talk about this paper on stage at this massive talk in Berlin to 1,500 people. And I was standing on stage and I was giving this really bombastic presentation about how brilliant it was that we were now in this era where AI and algorithms and data could help police to control an entire city's worth of people. Like genuinely naive. Because honestly, it just hadn't occurred to me that if there was one place in the world where that idea might sound alarm bells, it was going to be in Berlin, right? Yeah. The sort of ethical implications of this are really serious. And it just literally, to me or anyone else on the team, it just hadn't even popped into our minds. And that point, I think, was the moment when I realised that when you are building something that includes interfaces with humans, you really, really, really have to think about the wider implications of it, about the ethical implications, about the limitations of it, about where it is uncertain, about where it can go wrong, about how it will be trusted and mistrusted, about how it will be used and misused. All of that becomes so fundamentally important. And that was the switch for me in 2014, really. That was the moment when I started working very closely on this idea of the interface between humans and machines.
One thing I would like to unpack is in your work, you've kind of differentiated or made a distinction between talking about AI as a brain and actually it being a data box.
Yeah.
Can you just tell me why that distinction matters?
Yes, I really do think it matters because I think that humans have this incredible habit of parasocial relationships, essentially, right? We love to impart agency and human-like characteristics on everything. Evolution has left us completely ill-equipped for something that speaks to us like it's human and yet is not. And I think we have to be so careful about this, because I do think that already there are so many people who genuinely believe that a new creature, a new being has been birthed into existence. And I think that that is so dangerous to think about artificial intelligence in that way. But these things are not brains, right? They are not brains. They are underneath just giant tables of numbers that are being added together. Like, that's it. There's no like secret sauce underneath the hood. It's just numbers. It's just doing this incredible amount of computation that can replicate things like conceptual understanding. And to our sort of human minds, we just get sort of sunk into believing that it's a creature and an entity. I just don't think it is.
I think it's really interesting, because often we'll talk about, like, imagine AIs in your meetings, just give it a seat at the table. And I can totally see what you're saying in conversations that I have with people. And your point is, just think data box.
The reason why having AI having a seat at the table is good, because it's extremely good at analysis. It's extremely good at finding patterns. I mean, it's a pattern finding machine. It's extremely good at identifying gaps in what other people are saying, or all of that stuff. And that, if you imagine a character who has those abilities, absolutely give them a seat at the table. We haven't created a biological creature, and I think actually we would do well to remember that, because I think that it would allow us to think much more clearly and in a level-headed way about what the limitations of these things are and where they are uncertain, and where we should sort of create boundaries around what we're allowing it to do.
So this data box, as I will now frame it, it's not a brain, it's a data box.
Which is phenomenally impressive, by the way. Please don't think for a second that I'm not on board with what this stuff can do.
So how has AI, the kind of data box, how has that changed the work that you do as a mathematician? Like, where have you seen its potential for your work? Where have you seen its limitations?
It's changed it immeasurably. I'm a professor at Cambridge, right? So you walk around the sort of halls of Cambridge mathematics, and no one's bothering to do their own coding anymore. I mean, why would you? No one's really bothering to do their own calculations anymore, right? Why would you? I think it has made the process of learning so much faster, more efficient. I now have this endlessly patient tutor who can reword things in exactly the way that appeals to this precise way that my brain works and my brain likes to work. I feel like my own abilities have expanded immeasurably with all of the tools that are now available. And one of the key things about maths is that you have these almost completely siloed areas that don't really communicate with one another. So you might have topology over here, which is sort of the study of shapes and surfaces and spaces. And then over here you might have number theory, which is the study of prime numbers and how they connect with one another, and all of the strange, unusual patterns that you find just hiding within the number line. And those two spaces don't really talk to each other that much. But once you have got AI trained on mathematics, what it's able to do is to create essentially a sort of a map of where everything is. And it allows you to then go, oh, hold on a second. Actually, this area over here, there's a bridge that connects these two together that we have never noticed before. And by using that bridge, suddenly everything that we know about this space over here is applicable to everything that we know over here. And it just connects up these otherwise unconnected areas in an extremely fruitful way. And that right now is where we're at with maths. So we're at this sweet spot, however, of where I think that the algorithms, the AI is smart enough to be able to suggest areas of research, to speed up the research that gets done, but fundamentally still needs the human to be there. The mathematician still has a role in that.
So I'm quite interested about that relationship between AI and like the human being in the loop, and it links with some research that HSBC have recently published, which is around how people are making their investment and financial decisions. So the research shows that people feel comfortable and confident using it to inform the decision, to generate ideas, to analyse different options. But when it comes to the actual financial decision itself, they want a human to be part of that process. And I wondered what your perspective was about like how far we go with AI, when we need the human in the loop, where that confidence comes in?
I agree with the HSBC research. I mean, I agree with the sentiment behind it too. I completely understand why there would be that distinction. So I think it all depends on what the task is. I think that you can broadly split everything into verifiable tasks and non-verifiable tasks. So verifiable is there is a ground truth, there is an absolute sort of a fact somewhere that can be verified or not. And I think that when it comes to the analysis of stocks, of shares, of financial products, those are all verifiable facts. You know, you can run the analysis, come up with sort of data that supports a particular decision. But I think that when it comes to deciding what to do about those verifiable facts, I don't think that we're there yet with what AI can do. Look, I don't know actually whether we'll ever get to a point of whether AI will be better than humans at non-verifiable tasks. I think it's that really. I think it's really about working out the failure modes and making sure that you are mitigating against them. But then I also think for sort of bigger, broader systems, I also think it's about making sure that you make appealing what the algorithm says as easy as possible. Because I think that sometimes there's a lot of focus on making the AI give you a perfect output, right? Which would be great, but these things are always going to fall short of perfection, right? They are going to make mistakes. You sort of have to accept that. And rather than hoping that they won't, knowing that they will, and then working out how to both overturn those mistakes and sort of mitigate the worst harms of them.
I think it's that perfection thing's an interesting thing, and it's using it maybe as a thought partner rather than thought perfect.
Yes. The way I think of this is I had an interview with a musician a few years ago when musical AI was much more advanced than language AI, right? Like than spoken stuff. And they said they would play on the piano and then they'd set up this AI that when they played, it would continue on with what they'd been doing, but continue on in several different directions that they could sort of listen to and be like, oh, that's quite nice. And then they would pick it up and then they would carry on playing and then they would continue on and, and so on and so on. So when I am coming up with material for a podcast, I'll be like, oh, I like this idea. I think this is really interesting. I've read this thing. Where else could I go with it? And then allow the AI to sort of say, oh, you could go off into all of these directions. So you sort of pick something and then interrogate it. Is that right? Is that accurate? Show me the background references, look up somewhere else and sort of verify and be like, oh, okay, I like that. This is good. We're working onwards, and then play on and then sort of go off in different directions. But you see what I mean? There's no point where I can say this fact that you've told me about frogs in Chernobyl, how true is it? It would never be able to give me a real answer to that question. It would never be able to say, I'm 100% confident. I wouldn't trust it if it told me it was 100% confident. I want to take that away from it, come up with my own separate process to sort of work out and verify it, in the same way that the pianist was playing, himself to work out whether it worked or not. You see what I mean?
Yeah, no, I do. I think it's sort of it's an extension of your thinking, not a replacement for it. What other skills do you think are important if you're going to use AI effectively at work? What other areas should we be investing in so we can do it well?
Yeah, I mean, I really think critical thinking, and I think critical thinking starts with skepticism, which is one of the reasons why I say it's so important not to think of these things as brains. But and this is one of the things actually, people who are in the workplace at the moment, whose jobs they've been doing for a while, who understand the nuances of the task and who have the experience to know when the AI is giving good answers and not good answers, I think that they're in a really good position to have the AI accelerate their own processes. But what I think is worth remembering is that we've sort of been through this process of automation before, and there are lessons that we can learn from other places. So autopilot in planes is a really good example of this, because there have been a number of incidents where people have become so de-skilled in their own profession that they haven't been able to handle an emergency scenario, when the autopilot wasn't there for them. There's a really famous crash that I wrote about in my book, actually, Air France crash from Brazil to France, where they were going through a storm and some ice crystals formed on one of the sensors. It's like so not a big deal. The entire plane was absolutely fine. But because the sensor was a bit, was getting an incorrect reading, the autopilot booted out of the system. It sort of shut off and it went over to manual flying. And the pilot in the cockpit was so inexperienced with manual flying, had so little practice, so little understanding of what was actually going on, that they overcorrected for what the sensor was doing, panicked essentially, and then put the nose of the aircraft up to the point where it put into aerodynamic stall, and it literally fell out of the sky, and everybody on board lost their lives really tragically. But as a result of these accidents that have happened in the airline industry, they now have extremely strict rules about making sure that there are manual flying hours, a certain number of manual flying hours of takeoffs and landings that have to be done by the pilots, not just to keep up with people's skills, but also to make sure that you are allowing training for new people who are coming through. And I think this is it, actually, in terms of the skills that you need for this era of AI. It's the same skills that you've always needed. You know, you already know how to do these jobs. You already know what works and what doesn't work. And so I think that the ultimate skill here is about really keeping that as sharp as you possibly can.
I really like it that actually your the core capability that you need, the expertise around your job, is still essential, because you can't use that critical thinking skill if you've not got it. You have to have your own data. So in the course of our conversation, we have covered the future of mathematics, the exciting world, and who knows what's coming there. But if people were to take 3 tips away from the conversation we have had that can help them use AI to power up their performance, what would you want those tips to be? Okay,
it's definitely curiosity. Dive in, get going. This isn't going away. I think healthy skepticism is definitely another. These aren't humans. These aren't creatures. They are tools, very, very, very capable tools, but there are limits to what they can do and what they can offer. And I think the final one is it sounds really cheesy, but actually just remembering the genuine value of humans, away from this, we exist away from a computer screen, right? Leave the AI alone for a while. If you want to plan a meal, maybe call your friend who has got a really good recipe, or if you want to, I don't know, write a poem, write a rubbish one yourself. I think still sort of hang on to the things that ultimately make us who we are and give our lives meaning, really.
Hannah, thank you so much for the conversation.
Thank you.